of table tennis.
All right, let's do this thing. Episode 3 of the Summoning Hour.
Yeah.
With Evan Teicheira.
That's me.
Leo Pluridoom on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm still working on that one. I'm not sure if that's going to stick. That is an old handle that got revitalized only because Evangelos was taken.
I chuckled at it.
Okay.
I read it, and I'm like, Leo Pluridoom. That's awesome. So Evan and I were together on QA for Guild Wars 2. Though I think you started on Guild Wars 1 when you first came.
A little bit. I came in at the tail end of Winds of Change, which was not, I believe, official release, but was like expanded content, kind of the early stages of, I guess, Living World, that sort of thing. Yeah.
Okay, so then from that and kind of just general QA testing, Evan moved into kind of this pseudo community role where it was like an embedded QA member with the community team on Guild Wars 2. And well, I mean, at that point it was Guild Wars and Guild Wars 2. But that was kind of a special role because that was like the first time that we had actually embedded a QA member with another team. And from there, Evan has gone to Gigantic.
Been around a few other spots at this point.
A few others.
You know, working on Guild Wars for a bunch of years, and then segueing over to Motiga and Gigantic, and then periodically for a very short period with Meta Arcade and a mobile game that they're working on, and then cycling right back here at ArenaNet here in this building, and now working back on Guild Wars 2.
And now what do you do?
So everything started with QA, as you mentioned, working with you and the team, and them kind of pitching me what was back then their alpha program, their test crew, and then kind of segued and turned that into a much bigger community umbrella thing, moving into the other companies, do flat, straight community, and then back here at ArenaNet, I'm actually doing CS CRM, so that's customer relationship management, which essentially involves working with the customer to help them solve problems, to help their onboarding, that sort of thing.
Okay. So, I mean, with that role of being in touch with the community more, I mean, you know my take on
Joby hates the community.
This is why I'm not the front-facing face for pretty much any company or any company I'll ever work for.
It's all right. Yeah, I think you'd be good there. I think they'd get you.
Yeah, that's fair. A little bit of that over-aggressive, banhammer happy. It's like the joke bands that you see on Twitch all the time. Like, oh, you called me out for goofing on that play, and bam.
Goodbye. Just take a few minutes, and we all get a laugh, and then we're back, and everything's good. Yeah.
So, okay, let's talk about that time where you were that QA pseudo community, and you did a lot of player relations management then.
In a lot of ways, yeah. I mean, so I started flat QA, thanks to Elijah Miller and Bob Green giving me a shot. They were our managers back at that stage, bringing me in because I was a Guild Wars fan, like pretty hardcore.
Anyone who listens to my podcast will know your story because I told it on my very first episode when I was introducing myself.
That geeky kid who was really into Guild Wars.
Really into Guild Wars, who got like everyone's signature in the art book that first year.
Oh, it's so good.
I remember like you didn't have your book, and then you went. I was doing the line ushering because I mean that's what QA got to do at that time. I was at the front of the line. And I was just okay. Now you can go across to the next part of the line, and you went around and you got your book. And I mean, I was on like a 6-hour shift. I'm pretty sure I saw you for like 3 of those hours while you were trying to get anyone rotating in and out.
It's true.
And at some point you rotated, not back through the line, because that would have been a little absurd, but you came back around to me even, and you had me sign your book.
Yeah.
And then it was like 3 or 4 months later that you joined up here, and it was just like that super fan. And actually, that's a great. I think that's maybe a great question. Is like you were a super diehard fan, right? But how did you make that connection with ArenaNet so that they recognized you?
To be honest, I didn't expect any of it. Like Penny Arcade Expo up here in Seattle, Washington was something that me and my friends would come to, not to necessarily hunt down ArenaNet staff or any other team, but but that was a pilgrimage. This was like where we'd come as a group of friends, get away from our small hometown that didn't know anything about video games.
You were in Oregon at that time.
Central Oregon, Bend, Oregon.
So there was a trip.
Yeah, I mean, it was a nice drive. I know that some people drive all the way across the United States to make it, and power to them. But it was 7 or 8 hours, but it was an opportunity for us to get away every summer, go and do something cool in a city that was pretty foreign to us, and be there as a group playing games, having fun. And as early as when it was here in Bellevue, Washington at the Maidenbauer Center, that was kind of the key point of the trip, is our friend group was my community. It was our herd. And so we'd come up here and we'd pursue it that one time a year where we're having fun with it. I loved Guild Wars. I played a lot of Guild Wars when it first came out. Was in the early weekend before it even launched, and I think that was my record that I had set for ever playing video games. It was 13 hours straight at my friend Ryan Zach's house, and we stayed in his game room and just played through the morning. Never made it out of pre-searing. So good.
13 hours in pre-searing?
13 hours in pre-searing.
Wow.
That's a beautiful space. I think any Guild Wars fan out there is going to agree. They had a pre-searing character.
That's fair.
We live here. But over the years, I obviously had this respect. And what I actually loved about ArenaNet, I think what made them stand out to me was they did connect with their community, especially when they were working on that Guild Wars era. They were still a small team. They had created this MMO that wasn't really WoW necessarily. It never quite hit as big as the big dogs out there. I had come out of a 4-year stint with EverQuest and was done with pay-to-play models, so that's how I fell into it. But I loved that they connected with the community. They made me as a player feel like I was as much a part of this game and as part of this experience as anyone else, anyone on the team or any sort of thing. Right. And again, coming from Central Oregon, Bend, Oregon, which it's a very outdoorsy town. It's a town that shuts down at 8 p.m. every night because it is in the middle of it is not a city, really. Right. This was kind of cool to me because video games were never something I thought I could do. It was never something that I thought that people get jobs making video games. That's kind of weird. So ArenaNet kind of gave me that connection, and it was actually kind of that accident of every year dropping in, talking with them, and my main question was, how did you get to do what you do? Because I wanted to understand, how does someone go from being in school or playing games to making games? And it was never with the intent of getting a job. Yeah. But I asked it enough, and I showed up enough, and I was passionate enough about the game that's when Elijah Miller handed me his business card and was like, send me your resume, see what you think. And I got denied the first time, but a handful of months later, I got to touch base with them again, and they brought me in, gave me a chance on the QA team, and realized that because I was so passionate about the game, because I was so passionate about that connection, that thing that had brought me in, that's where it really led into this community aspect of my career, where they gave me the alpha and we went from there.
Yeah, and a lot of, I hope that this is other studios' perspective of QA, but when I was here, I was QA number 5 on Guild Wars 2, and the idea was that QA was is your best representation of the playing community, of the gamers that you're going to be playing.
In a lot of respects, yeah.
And so building up that QA who was able to represent a player, the next logical leap was to have someone to connect with the community and start bringing that into QA, where ArenaNet really respected QA, and so we were pulling from notable community members, bringing it in, formulating it, and polishing it to that ArenaNet polish.
Right. That AAA level that they were striving for with their product.
And that was passed on to people like Colin Johansson. It was passed on to Dave Beetlestone. It was passed on to amazing people. Yeah, amazing artists, amazing designers, amazing people who just cared greatly about Guild Wars 2 and where it was going.
Right.
And so that was the start of me recognizing community as really that next step. and let's see, 2000. Let's see, that was 2008, 2009, or 2009, 2010 era when I was here. You probably came in late
2011.
2011.
Yeah, early 2011.
Yeah. So I mean, thinking about that time, like I think Justin TV was still the thing, or was still a thing,
right,
before Twitch,
right.
And so there was connecting with your community was a lot harder. It was all on forums or IRC. Ugh. Discord wasn't a thing. Twitter wasn't a thing.
Right.
Facebook was barely a thing.
Well, V-Bulletin was the thing. Like that was the main forum.
V-Bulletin. Oh my God.
Right. Like they were the fundamental forum of you had a V-Bulletin forum and those were your boards.
How inaccessible is that? How, like, think about that level of friction just to get in. You have to create a new account.
Right.
And for every V-Bulletin, it's a new account, new account.
Right. Everything was isolated. And really, it's fascinating to me because, again, this ability for ArenaNet to step outside and go to these conventions, and they really owned PAX in the beginning. Like, they were one of the studios that I looked at, and they were there every single year. They were really driving that PAX experience. Yeah. And, again, when they were down here in downtown Bellevue, I remember them having this community scavenger hunt where you went around and you did a Sudoku at one station and got your card punched, and you went to another and you watched this trailer for this new game, Guild Wars Factions. Like, what is this game coming out? And you watched the video and then had a trivia question, like how many guys were standing in the pavilion when Shiro was giving a speech? And you're like, well, cool. Like, and that was it. They had this level of engagement, and I remember people. I remember building those relationships with people because of that. I remember people like Mike Lee when he was actually there and talking about the game he was working on. And he was a programmer, and it's not necessarily, community wasn't his thing, but that being the heart of the company, that is what really made them stand out from so many others of that era. And I think there's a lot of other companies that are now catching up, but that was kind of cool how when I came in here, I started in this QA aspect of representing player base in a lot of ways, but I think it was only about 5 months that they bumped me up and made me a lead to say, hey, we've got this alpha program. There's not much to it at the moment. It's kind of a remnant of the Guild Wars one day. Production doesn't have time to actually run this thing. You seem like you like people. Do you want to do this? And it's funny because you were talking about that forum thing. My first answer was no. I don't want to spend my life on forums. I don't want to spend my whole every day working on V-Bulletin and playing with forums because that doesn't sound like fun. Like, if I'm a fan of the game, I want to play the game and do the QA dream, that sort of thing. But I loved QA as well. And it took a little bit of pushing before I was like, you know what? I'm going to take this. I'm going to take this as an opportunity. I'm going to see what I can do with it. And I'm going to make this the best damn alpha program in the community, in the world, because I want the community to be a part of this game as much as I was. I want to give the players a voice in the product that they're playing and love. Because there's a value to that. There's a value to that, QA back in our day was finding bugs, but they were also providing feedback. They were also talking directly with the designers and saying, hey, this is great, or this is less than great. Here's how we could make it better. And I wanted to kind of apply that with the community as well and say, hey, these are the guys who are actually going to be eating up our content. They're going to be playing it and enjoying it. How do we give them that voice? And that was my kind of the goal of what I was doing.
And that's really, I think it's really important that you get that personal connection where they feel empowered to even use their voice in on it. Because I could see a lot of companies, especially now, relying purely on business data. And so, I mean, there's value in that too.
Right.
But like, just because you have 1,000 players all doing this event or doing this content doesn't mean it's fun, doesn't mean it's good. It just shows you that they were there and that they spent time there and you have to dive in. How long did they stay there? Why did they stay there? Why did they leave?
I mean, you're absolutely right. Like, there is, I will never downplay analytics and numbers and what they can do, because you can get some amazing numbers to work with in there. But you do miss that human element. And there's times where, my own example where I was jumping into certain Guild Wars 2 content, not because I was particularly enjoying it, but because I am an achievement hunter. And I looked at this end goal of saying, I can get 100 points from that thing and maybe this skin or maybe this other thing. And they can't learn that through numbers. Right. They can't learn that I went there for the points, and it was a pain in the butt to get through that whole process.
And then you hated the entire thing.
Right. Or maybe they thought, we put this carrot at the end. He clearly wanted the carrot. And I'm like, I have never used the carrot since I got it. I don't care about the carrot. And that's the sort of thing you get from your players. You get that feeling of, hey, we can understand where people are playing and what people are doing, but you can tell us why, and we can learn from that. We can make better games from that.
Yep. And I have a hard time believing that you can tell fun from numbers.
It's kind of hard.
Yeah, and like you're saying, what's fun for you may not be fun for me, and vice versa. I mean, how are your PvP achievements doing?
Exactly. I will tell you what, I would be higher on that list if I wanted to go in PvP. But there's achievements there, but that's where it's like, if I go in there and if they draw me from a random bucket of numbers and say, let's look at how this kid do, he's PvPing a lot. Clearly we did something right there. It's like, no. It's because I'm a whore for points, and I want to go and get those points. So it's like, you're not going to get that without talking with your community. And again, I think that's something that this studio in particular does fairly well, is they are listening to their community. They're connecting and they're engaging with their community in a lot of ways. And the big thing there is, I think we also learn from our mistakes, which is kind of a big part of building video games, I think, is
absolutely.
It's okay to mess up. It is completely okay. That happens. It's going to happen. This entire past year of loot boxes can prove it can happen.
Oh, yeah.
But you got to listen and you got to fix it. And I think that the gaming community is mature enough to see, they're doing something about that, and we're going to get on board with this studio because of that.
Or, and think about, I actually don't know what Guild Wars 2 release schedule is like now, but I believe it's slowed down.
It's not every 2 weeks. Which, technically it is, but it's more like there are smaller things like, hey, we're putting this gem store build out. So things are still shifting up every 2 weeks, but when it comes to the bulk content, we're talking a few months at that point.
So, to me, that was an important lesson to learn.
Right.
Is that you may have the team or the teams to be able to sustain it.
Right.
But it doesn't necessarily make that sustainable by the players.
Right.
And while I think Guild Wars 2 and ArenaNet did a great job of saying the content is still accessible, it's free if you log in just once during the release.
You don't even have to play it.
You don't even have to play it. Just log in and it's unlocked.
Yeah.
And then if you miss it, you can buy it for a relatively cheap price.
Right.
And so it's like, okay, so you were busy, life happened. That was one of my favorite parts about Guild Wars 2.
Yeah.
It never punished you for life happening.
Right. And that's still something that I really respect in a lot of games these days. Because,
and I mean, so like they could have been, like the business side of it could have just been notorious about how it locked that content and said one done, never again.
Right.
Or like you can only buy it 5 months later when the season's over for $20.
Right.
And it's like, are you really doing a season pass kind of thing that gets like beat up every time a new game comes out with a season pass or scheduled DLC? Like, no, like even back then, ArenaNet was saying, "Nah, that ain't us."
And ArenaNet's always been on that front line of innovation, and I think that's what has attracted to me. In the beginning and even now of coming back to them, it's that ability to always strive for better, to not just say that's the solution that people are even asking for sometimes, because there's a lot of times where fans will be like, this is clearly what we want, and we're like, but is it really? Can we do that better? And I really respect that, because that means that they're working towards something that, again, listening, engaging, working with communities, but always keeping them at the heart of what you do.
Right.
So
and now we're going to jump ships a little bit.
We diverted pretty heavy there.
Done. So now we kind of talked about ArenaNet now and back then, and it kind of jumped back and forth. But then you had this time in between at Motiga working on Gigantic. Now, vastly different products.
Oh my God.
And I'm assuming vastly different communities.
In a lot of ways, yeah. I was jumping from the MMO community, which is a very special beast to understand and figure out in your own right, right over to the straight PvP MOBA community.
And hardcore competitive attitudes.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was a game being built in a way that gave people a lot of room to learn and strive and excel and really step up their game as a team and as individuals. So the people who were playing it, the alphas that we were working with, the community we were working with, they got into it hardcore. They got into it super hardcore. And it was brilliant. It was so much fun to watch them actually playing this game at that level. But it was a very different dialogue that we had with them from a community standpoint.
Right. So what was that like for you, especially like where PvP is not necessarily your thing,
admittedly,
but then also the community mindset, the perspective of what the development team was doing, vastly different.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Now Gigantic announced early in its development and was very candid and open about a lot of things that it was doing. I mean, doing open demos, doing like the PAX launch party.
Yep.
Like 3 years.
Yeah.
Like 3 years ago or something like that, when it was one map. The two
like 6 heroes.
Yeah, it was super limited at that point. But they were just like, here it is. This is what we're building. That
was another company that built themselves around the community mentality. Like, first and foremost, above and all else, it was almost to an even a greater degree than what ArenaNet did back in the day. But I'm not going to say that. I'm going to say it's a kind of a different flavor.
Yeah.
And it was that mentality that we hear a lot more these days of community first, but it was taken to a much deeper extent where community first was almost something you could drop on people and they'd be like, oh yeah, I forgot. Yeah, we'll do that thing. Like it might be, no, we can't do this thing because it's going to take us weeks of programming time. We're going to have to sidetrack this other thing. But it literally became the thing where you're like, but the community really needs this for this reason. And as long as you could present it into how is this making it better for them, they would shift gears to make that happen. So it was brilliant in that respect. And it worked for them. It was really, really really good right off the bat and built a really strong, passionate, invested community, not only around the game they were building, but around the company that was just getting spun up, really.
Yep. No, I mean, it was really new, and you already had something to show, and you were getting a lot of esports attention, a lot of like teams already saying like, we went in.
Some really good teams.
I remember it was like the celebratory announcement party where you had the customized beer bottles and stuff like that.
That was even before I was there, actually. But that was driven a lot by the guys who were there, by Troy Hewitt and Ali Murdoch, who was a former alumni of ArenaNet.
She's actually on schedule for sometime late March to be on here.
Oh man, she if you want to talk real community and real that PvP aspect, she is a brilliant one to talk to about that. So she'll be able to fill you in on that. But yeah,
all right, that's a promise. Ali, you heard it.
You're in, Ali. I'm signed you up again. But I mean, like, they were really driving that community front, and really, those are two community managers that are brilliant at what they do because they are able to connect with people so well. So absolutely, on just a fundamental level, they get people on board with them, they get people behind them, and they believe in them because they are there. They're waving the community war banner on their behalf. So they're brilliant.
And now, on top of that, we've moved away from vBulletin. Twitter, Instagram less so, but
it's still there.
It's still there. So every social media outlet, Snap, anyway, could be used to reach out to most game studios now. And Discord, self-made communities, that just say, oh, you're an employee, come on in. You have like admin privileges and talk to your community. And yes, it's still like that 1% or like 10% of the community hopping into that. And it's probably a smaller group, or it's a smaller group than those who are on the official forums or the subreddit that is now most games' official forums. Because
I forget the stat. It's like Reddit is the third biggest site on the internet or something.
Yeah,
it's some crazy stat. Maybe just forums, but
it's all community, like community curated, which is, I think, for me, one of the more interesting parts is that developers are backing away from the organization and the management of it.
In a way, yeah.
And they're just kind of circling the community, paying attention, and as something hits the community, they're there to get the immediate reaction as opposed to waiting for a forum to fill out.
Well, and that's something that ArenaNet, again, has always been good at. Like, they have a very strong Reddit community, absolutely brilliant, all community run. I would argue have one of the strongest wiki communities in the entire industry.
That's right. I forgot about
all
the wiki.
Community run. ArenaNet backs them. I believe all that they do is host the site, but the community itself are the ones running it, moderating it, keeping it up to date. And I believe just the sheer number of pages, the sheer amount of information, you as a new player can know nothing about Guild Wars, and if you go into the game, you ask questions, and the community is usually great at answering you. But the moment you learn about the wiki is just eye-opening.
Yeah, just how much that there is. And
right.
I mean, and to a degree, they're almost taking, or I mean, they are literally taking the community into their own hands.
Yeah, yeah.
And so you're not wrangling kittens anymore.
Yeah.
You are more responding to kittens playing with yarn. You're like, oh, you're out of yarn.
Oh, you're on the couch. Don't claw the couch.
Enabling the community.
Right. And that I think is the key of where we as an industry have grown and where we are still going, is that enabling of the community. And I think programs like Discord, brilliant. They stepped in, they saw a need, they saw this. These other voice programs are very difficult to set up or host or manage. You need the one person who's running their one computer so that you can get on and raid properly. Like, let's make this easy. And I think that so many companies are going that direction now, and it's such a good, healthy thing, both from a kind of a community organization standpoint, but also from a game standpoint of giving them the tools. Not giving them a catered experience, a story that you want them to tell and run through and go from A to Z, because they're going to digest that as quickly as they can, and then they move on. But instead giving them the tools, especially in an MMO context, to build something, to flourish and to really tell their own stories.
What I can't wait for is seeing some of those game Discord partnerships.
Yeah.
There's already the Discord streamer overlay, and that kind of helps some aspect of the community.
Right.
But like waiting to see, like using the looking for group tool in any game, joining up and being like, having a little symbol saying, this guy's also in the Discord.
Right.
And being like, would you like to join the Discord from the game? And then suddenly your voice chat in game is now connecting you to the Discord. And then it's just like, look at all these other people who are there.
Yeah.
And so now you're putting names and almost quite literally faces to names, because you could find people who are streaming through that Discord.
Right.
And now you're going from game to Discord and Discord back to game. And now you've got your looking for group tool now has a list of people.
Right.
No longer
this kind of global database.
No longer this anonymous matchmaker system that almost always seems to be out to get you.
Well, and more importantly, not isolated.
Not isolated,
right?
Exactly.
Like it's not just your Steam list or your Blizzard list or your whatever list. It is this idea of having the gaming community.
It's almost like you're a suggested friends list
in a way,
and you get that a lot with social media anyway. So it's a barrier of friction that's already there for people.
Yep.
But people have also already accepted it.
It's true.
It's just like
very much so.
Oh, I'm on Instagram. Oh, you connected to your Facebook. All of your people on Facebook are also on Instagram. Do you want to follow?
How many of these people have an Instagram account? You know how many of them have an Instagram account about food? Oh, all of them.
Yeah.
Right.
So we're getting tools that are lowering and lowering that friction level of getting to be part of the community. Because oddly enough, I still see that people would rather. I mean, there's nothing wrong with this or anything, but there's people who would rather just play single player in a multiplayer game.
Of course.
But then there's people who are just like, I'm uncomfortable reaching out to other people.
Right.
And playing games with other people.
Right.
And so it's just like that fear of like messing up. But things like this connection between game and community tools is just going to make that less and less of a thing in my mind.
Yeah. And I think it's also going to be nice to kind of take that onus when it's pulled away from the game studios and put on these tools, only because it does take that much more development to be thinking of these social systems. Like, obviously you're going to have social systems that are the given, like chat and friends list and that sort of thing. But to go that extra mile is difficult. It's expensive. It's challenging. It's how are we going to integrate this in our game or across all of our games? And so I think I think you're right that is the direction that it's going to go, and I can't wait to see it, and I can't wait to see what tools end up doing it, what programs step up to that plate.
And on like even beyond that, like that kind of Discord and outside tool is just an interesting new development.
Yeah.
But there's one other tool that I have always been, I want more from it.
Yeah.
But I don't know how. And it's the launcher.
Right.
That boom, here's your news cap. Here's your friends who are also playing, like the Blizzard launcher, or even the Guild Wars 2 launcher, where it's a patch update, and it's like, okay, here's your news, and here's the new stuff at the store. You can open it and go to a browser, all that kind of stuff.
We were dreaming big on the Guild Wars 2
we
launcher
really
back
were
in the day. Like I know, especially QA and you and I especially both were behind that idea of like, God, what can we do with this?
But then we're also talking cross-platform things, so like Steam, or not cross-platform, but like cross-platform is a whole different thing.
That's a beast that is still coming down the line and is going to happen.
And the challenge is still there for like Sony and Microsoft, where the capability is there for those two platforms to talk to each other, but who's going to extend that olive branch first? That's loaded with like
Nintendo?
Cyanide. Yeah. Sony and Microsoft will be talking to each other and be like, we could do this, but they're also having like that dagger hidden behind their back, just waiting, spy versus spy style. And Nintendo's just going to come up with like candy for everyone and be like, can't we all just be happy and work together?
Oh, also, we already did it.
Yeah, exactly.
Whether you like it or not, we released an app on both your systems that connect to ours. So cool.
Yeah. So with the launcher and being able to say, oh, Guild Wars 1, Guild Wars 2, Project A, Project B, Project C, whatever else is going on through that single developer.
Right.
And being able to say, oh, your friend is playing, like, the Blizzard launcher is probably a better example at this point. It's like, oh, here's your friend list. Here's all the different games they're playing. But then you're also getting these cross-game interactions, like, play enough games of Heroes of the Storm and get this Overwatch skin.
Which they do, right?
Yeah, they do that, and I think we're going to start seeing more and more of that. But how long does it until they start just saying, "Oh, there's two completely separate games over here,"
right?
And then really start making them act buddy-buddy.
And I don't know. Like, I think the place we'll see those sort of developments come from would be a place like GDC, because GDC is where game developers come together, share knowledge, and really connect on that level. Connect on that level beyond, we're just building a product or we're just doing X, Y, and Z, and saying, how do we improve the art that we're working on? And that, I am always excited to see what comes out of GDC, what the talk about, even on the community front. Like, I full credit to Riot Games. Whenever they put on a presentation about community, about how they're talking to, how they're looking at analytics, how they're cleaning up toxicity, how they're doing X, Y, and Z, there is so much to learn from the research that they have put in and the trials that they've run, the things they've tried in their game, even just putting it out there live to see what happens.
Yeah.
It is so brilliant, especially if you're looking for that community. Like,
nice.
How do we prevent toxicity in an online space? That is the question.
One of my favorite things that they ever did was the player tribunal.
Yeah.
I love that idea. It's just like, we're not going to present an opportunity to have bad face.
Right.
This is on the players to decide.
In a lot of ways.
In a lot of ways. It's not quite that cut and dry.
Right.
But like, I really liked that approach to things. That way the community, and this is to the degree that you are wrong.
Well, and the nice thing about Riot is what they've done is a lot of what Troy and Ali were doing back with Gigantic, and a lot of what I think circles around to this original idea of giving the community the systems, and that is being very transparent in what you did, like what you did to mess up and get banned, and what you can do to fix it. And Riot has done a good job of actually putting it out there and being like, here's the reason why you were banned, here's what you can do to remedy that. They're trying that reform process, and that is really what we were trying to establish with Gigantic too, was this idea of, hey, we're going to try to be as lenient as possible. We're going to give you, we're going to let you be salty. We're going to let you be competitive. We're going to let you, get out there and interact with other human beings. If you push it over that line, we want to let you know what you did wrong and why we actually got out of our chair and did something about it. Because we don't want to do that either. No one in the industry wants to ban anybody, I think, except for Joe B. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe my whole premise is wrong.
Guild Wars 2 closed beta weekend. No streaming. It's on the NDA. No streaming.
Yeah.
Streamer. We got a streamer over here.
Let's watch it live. Let's watch it.
Let's watch it live.
Everybody turn on the stream.
Evan, ban him. Pull it up, Evan.
Okay, that was a little fun, but I mean, obvious legal contracts aside, in a lot of ways, like we want players to get out there and play and have a good time, but I think being transparent, being open, trying to reform players and let them know, hey, here's how you can keep playing, but here's how you can do it. And that's when we won't care. Like there is a direction there, and I think there is still movements there to make that more of a broad part of our industry. Because I think the black and white bans, you cross those lines so we're cutting you without thinking about it, that inhuman sort of automated bot banning, that's not going to fly for much longer.
No, I can't imagine it is. And I mean, here Blizzard gets a lot of flack with it in Heroes of the Storm and Overwatch. It's just like, oh, the reporting system does nothing, and it's like, that's not true. This other guy got banned for 2 days, but it's such a minimal punishment for people, and they'll just be like, oh, I'll just switch to my other account, and it's like
it's tough. I mean, and that's where CS has that challenge of like, how do we make this as human as possible while managing a community of hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of players, and that's tough.
You mean you can't just wave your wand and say all these people are no longer toxic and like everyone just gets along
and do it perfectly? Nah.
What was it? It was a design balancer who said it is worse to be correct 100% of the time on 80% than it is to be 80% correct or 100% correct on 80% of the time. I might have gotten that backwards.
I think you said the same thing. But.
So it's better to be 100% right 80% of the time.
Right.
Than it is to be 80% right 100% of the time.
You could agree with that, yeah.
So, like, when you're talking about people and how they're investing money and their time, you have to be gentle, but not gentle and firm.
In a way, I'd say gentle and honest. Like, because again, I think the key to it there is working to get them on board with it and be like, of course, someone's banned, they're going to be upset about it.
Sure.
But it's helping them understand why that happened and why it was a reasonable thing that we did. And, gold sellers aside, and the people who are going to feign, anger because they are clearly in the black side of this things, where it's like, no, you are just doing an illegal thing.
Right.
I think that majority of people out there he's going to say bravely about the internet, are reasonable people, are capable of hearing you, and they might be angry, they might still be disappointed in the decision, but if you're trying to help them, maybe the more they hear that, the more they're going to get on board with it and be like, yeah, okay, I've heard this story before. Maybe I shouldn't drop that racial slur on that other guy I was playing with. Like, yeah, maybe you shouldn't. And I think a majority of players, I think I can confidently say, a majority of gamers out there will understand and at least process that. And at least you've planted that seed in their brain of, let's see if we can make something grow there. And maybe we remove that from their vocabulary. Again, said racial slur that maybe shouldn't be said anywhere.
And now one of the bigger topics that have come up in the community space is the LGBTQ community and how a lot of games are not only including characters of that sort into their games, like Guild Wars 2, the heroes that they've introduced and the different backgrounds that they come from. And
big diversity there.
Huge diversity. So that I know that the writing team here has gotten a lot of props on that.
Absolutely.
And other RPGs are starting to include more diversity, but there's still a bit of that flack from the community, whether it's player choice that introduces a lot of that diversity or characters that are just wanting to reach a more broad audience. Now, I imagine you've had to handle some of that on the community side of just being able to have a dialogue with the players and kind of with that reporting mechanic of like, you can't just be saying these things left and right. It's offensive. But then also trying to help the community understand what the developers are trying to do.
Yeah.
What's that been like for you? Because, I mean, that's a touchy subject for a lot of people. A lot of people are very passionate about it.
Right. On
on both sides.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, it's a conversation that needs to happen.
Right.
And so the studio, every studio out there, full of creative types, full of people who have stories that they want to tell.
Yeah.
But you still have to deal with the reaction from the players.
I think one of the gifts I've been given in my now 7.5 years of working in the industry is I've worked with some truly brilliant teams. I've worked with teams that aim for diversity, that aim for telling stories that are the right stories to tell, and not just going for the greatest common denominator and settling on it. Settle has not really been a term in the vocabulary of ArenaNet, of Motiga, of Meta Arcade, of anyone that I've worked with in those regards. So that makes it easy in a way, because then what you can understand is this is why we're doing it, and I think part of that larger conversation comes down to the game studios themselves. It comes down to what is the story they want to tell, because games, when it comes down to it, they are an art form. They are something that bring together artists and creative people from a ton of different disciplines, from writers to editors to analytics people and QA. I mean, like people who you don't necessarily think of when you're playing a game, but are equally as passionate about creating something brilliant and artistic and amazing. And I think that when you have that level of investment and passion and resolve to tell a story, then it kind of becomes easy to communicate that. And it becomes more about saying, this is the story we want to tell. These are the characters we want to write, and here's why. And if anybody has a problem with that, I mean, there will always be people who have a problem. Like, you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt and say, this is the story we're telling. Like, you can try it out, you can jump behind it, you can try to understand where you're coming from, or maybe it won't resonate and come back later, we'll try again.
Or maybe it's just not your favorite episode in a season long.
Right. Like, it's you're never ever going to make everyone perfectly happy. Yeah. And that's I think that is especially an MMO mentality of you have so much diversity in race, in religion, in belief, in gender, in preferences, in anything. I mean, preferences about a stupid mythological race that you've put in your game, where I hate Quaggan in Guild Wars 2. You hate Quaggan in Guild Wars 2. But so many people out there, the Quaggan is the divine coming for them. Like, stupid things like that people are going to have opinions on, and it doesn't make them wrong.
There's no opinion about Quaggan. You're either
and
right.
then Joby, whole argument gone.
You're either right or you're wrong, and if you like Quaggan, you're wrong.
I mean,
I'm unapologizing.
I hear you. Look, that's your opinion, man. But this is exactly it. Like, there are so many opinions out there that it becomes less about trying to change them and more about explaining the choices that you made. And again, this is, I think what this is revolving around is assuming a level of maturity of your gaming audience, that they are capable of hearing something. And if they're not, then why are we, nothing we can say you're going to hear anyway. So what? So the best you can do is try. And the best you can do is try to clarify, explain, and in a way get them on board. But it's funny, I think of a lot of what I do in working with alpha communities and working with communities is kind of hearkening back to what we did in middle school in the United States, which were those tests. They were part of kind of the expanded learning where they're like, we want you to write a persuasive paper. Yeah. And it was always something that would come up like once or twice a year where they have you write these papers, and they're like, here's the format and here's how you write a persuasive paper.
Sure.
And that's kind of a lot of what I do now is I try to persuade people. I don't try to sell them things. I just try to get them on board with it. And sometimes they won't be, and that's where we're listening and we're talking. And otherwise, that's the goal. And it's fascinating to think of this thing that in my mind was kind of this side note that became such a, like interacting with people and talking about things you're passionate about, they're just going to come down to having to try to persuade them.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, and that's no different than a designer trying to persuade you to go down this system of content and saying like...
Which players never will. There is never a path you can create that players will not choose to go a different path.
Yeah. Here's a breadcrumb.
Yep. Nope.
No breadcrumb. I'm gonna go that way.
But the swamp is over there. I mean, this is just the community, and again, this is why I am, from a community standpoint, more passionate about giving them the tools to tell adventures rather than trying to force adventures upon them. Because
tell me more about that. Tell me more about how you want to enable your community to tell their stories.
I mean, so from my standpoint, working with customer service, working with customer relationships, my goal is to empower them with tools. My goal is to give them the knowledge, to give them the steps to solve problems, the ability to help others around them and have that disseminate within the community. So it's about trusting them with power and saying, hey, I trust that you as a human being can handle this and make gaming and our game and everything a better place because you now know it. Because you now know how to update your DirectX 9 drivers, you will be able to apply that to other games that require this. And great, we've done something bigger than ourselves. And I think that from my standpoint directly, it is that. It is empowering players. I think from game development standpoint, it is about empowering players, but that kind of comes down to the game you're working with. That comes down to what you can do with it. Because obviously games have rules. Games have a general system and a goal in mind, and you got to work around that. But the more I think that games start to realize that we can put things in, even little things in, that help players organize and define their own stories, not from a necessarily a narrative standpoint, but from a thinking back to days of like EverQuest, where I'm wandering through a zone. There's no real direction in the game, but the stories I remember are the things that I did there, are the people that I interacted with. The time we wandered into the middle of a plane and I died, and my corpse run was trying to just find my way back to this, and all the stuff that happened between that, or the time that we went to a zone like Crushbone, which I believe was this little knoll nook in the side of a zone somewhere, and we played tag. Me and a few friends would just run around and try to get around this level and play hide and seek tag, and it was silly and ridiculous, but that's the stuff I remember. It's not it's not necessarily the big boss raids and every moment of that. It's the stories that I created.
Exactly. And two stories I want to tell with this one. World of Warcraft. This was before the Burning Crusade expansion came out. They had introduced the storyline to get your tier 0.5 gear. So like the tier 0.5 gear was before you could do Molten Core, or like it was a step before doing a 40-man raid, and it was a 5-man storyline. So most of the steps you had to do 5-man dungeons. Right. One of the last steps was completing one of the dungeons, one of the instances, in less than 30 minutes. It was the 30-minute Undead Stratholme run. Okay. Most guilds who are completing Molten Core already as 40-man guild or 40-man raids on my server at least weren't able to do it. And so my brother, myself, and one of my brother's friends, we had a warrior, undead priest, and my undead warlock, Recall. Okay. long live Recall. We were taking two pubs, randos, with us into the dungeon. And we were clearing it. And so as soon as those other raid guilds on my server saw us running the full complete tier 0.5 gear, they started giving us gold to run members through that because they couldn't do it. Right. And for us, we did this without voice chat. They were used to voice chat. They're like, get into our Ventrilo server, our TeamSpeak server, whatever the guild was using. And we're like, no, that's not how we do it. Why? Like you're going to throw us off by yelling at us, and it's like some of these guilds were really full of themselves, so it's just like, okay, well, yeah, I know we told them 50 gold, but we're telling you 100. It happens. But so we would finish that. And so I don't know where we ended, like there was no leaderboard or anything like that for that, but we ended up cutting it down from barely finishing at 30 minutes. And by the time that content basically went away, we were down to like 22 minutes. And wiggle room with random people. But with the three of us, we were so on top of what that was just an amazing story. I tell that story every time I talk about MMOs now. So
it makes so much sense because it's something that you built. I mean, granted, the systems were put in place for you to master, but you, in mastering them and being given the tools to kind of wiggle in that and find your own way, you did that.
Yeah. So that was so cool. And I mean, that was 12 years ago,
right?
So like 11 years ago, something like that. And I still remember it, and I still remember how frantic it was doing that content.
Yeah, I mean, some of those old MMOs in a lot of ways were pretty like, we're just going to give you an open world, Godspeed, good luck.
Yeah. And now the second story I wanted to tell, and it's less of a story as it is just kind of a broad observation. PUBG. It is entirely about player stories.
100%.
Whether you win or you lose, winning gives you that huge celebration at the end. That winner chicken dinner.
Yep.
Hype, going all out. Right. Like, you want to yell and scream when you get that.
Right.
Because you worked your ass off to get there, typically.
Right. And over the course of several games of learning the gear, the stuff you're doing, the strategies.
And even beyond learning what all the stuff that is in the game.
Right.
Once you know everything that's in the game, the stories that you tell about where you jump off at, what gunfight you got in at that spot, how intense was it? Did you even see anyone for the entire match until it was down to the tiny ass circle?
Right.
Like, and there's a gunfight over there. I'm going to run over here, steal the car, and drive to the other side of the island or other side of the zone. Like, that's a story in itself. Or like the dumbass shit that you see on YouTube all the time, like, I'm a scooter, bump the rock, boosh, straight up, like, and people laugh about that. That's a story.
And you're exactly right.
And I mean, this is a hardcore, competitive, very frustrating, very punishing game where random happens. And you have no control of the 99 other people that you're playing with, or if you're playing with squads, the few other people.
Sure. Right.
95 to 99 people you have no control over.
Right. You're absolutely right.
But those stories are so powerful.
Yeah.
And so now we're having a time where people are understanding random happens, and where everything's outside of my control except for my very few behaviors.
Yep.
In the course of one game, you actually make very few decisions. But when you take your few decisions, multiply it times 100, there's a whole bunch of chaos.
The story is being written by everyone there. And I think PUBG captured that perfectly. I think the game modes that have come out of that, we can even look back and see League of Legends, Dota, that sort of context too. It's the same thing where you've got a simple rules, the simple things that are happening, but it's all about what are these 10 players doing? And what is the story that unfolds? And that's why whenever we go to the international, we love it, not because I know Dota, not because I am super into MOBAs, because I'm not good at MOBAs, but because it is a different story every time.
And you get the macro view of the entire story of the entire tournament.
Right.
You get the macro from every team's perspective. And watching the Cinderella story, if there is one that year. Or watching the team that's just expected to dominate just fall flat in the first round, or not even make it out of groups.
Right.
And so you get those stories, but then you look at the individual series. Was it a 5-game series? Was it a 3-game series? Was it was it a utter stomping? Was it a hard fought the entire time? And then you have the player stories after that.
These people dropped in the loser bracket and had to work their way back up.
Exactly. And then you just look at every individual game. You have the macro sense of what the 5-on-5 is, the control of all the resources on the map.
Right.
But then you can go down to the individual player story, watching them make play after play.
Man. And when you get those heroes, like the people that you love and follow.
The 100-some different heroes in both League and Dota, and now 75 in Heroes of the Storm.
Right.
Like, each one of those characters is a story in themselves, and the pick of it.
Yeah.
And you can even look at the draft as a story in itself.
Yep. For some games, yes.
For some games, yeah.
I have to look at certain games and say they do it better than others, but you're absolutely right how the draft can take 10 or 20 minutes, and it's because it's that tense. Like, we're strategizing how the whole next thing is going to play out. And I think video games have done a good job of now jumping on this idea of player generated sort of stuff. And I think it's been around since, we can go back to Team Fortress or Counter-Strike.
Anywhere where there's a mod community.
Right.
They had a different story to tell than what the original game was.
And man, have you come up with some brilliant games from a modding community, whether that's H1Z1, whether that's anything that has gone into even single-player experiences like the Elder Scrolls.
Yep.
Whether that's gone to a favorite series of mine, Just Cause, and you see a modding community be like, Just Cause is great, but we're going to make a multiplayer Just Cause. And it's like, great! Like, these guys are actually reliably going around and creating these new game things, not because the game is bad, not because of the story that was told was bad, but because they believe in this concept of player stories.
Yeah. So keep going. I'm curious.
Gonna fly through here.
Yeah, going to...
Camera's flying now, fly mode.
Holy cow. Could you imagine, or can you actually realize that we've been talking for 55 minutes already?
Absolutely no clue.
Yeah. And what's going to be even better is that people are going to start watching this because, as everyone can see, there's footage for the first time as opposed to just audio, which will be exciting.
There's flying footage, in fact.
Flying footage. I just want to make sure I'm not going to be like, oh, it's been 2 hours and it just feels like an hour talking.
Right.
So I want to keep it to that hour-long format. Sure. Like, here's 5 minutes to talk about anything that you want, whether it's a story, tips for anyone who wants to get into the games industry. And I mean, take as long as you want. But I definitely want to get some tips and some advice out there for people who are new to the industry, who are still in the industry, but maybe thinking about switching departments and just like what is important going forward, especially how far things have come in the last 6 years since you and I were working together.
Right. And how fast the video game industry is changing as a whole. I mean, man, that's kind of a tough question because, like I said, back in the beginning, that was the question that I asked everyone when I went to the conventions of how do you do what you do? And the things you learn is you have artists who studied English, you have programmers who studied biology, you have people who studied every possible degree and thing you could think of, Latin. Yeah. You've got people at Bethesda who studied architecture and are now in there building houses. Like, do you be passionate about what you do? And then I think when you find how that fits in the industry, you'll find that exists in some way. Yep. It's tough for me to give any sort of solid advice because I feel lucky. I feel like, I was passionate about a game, passionate about games as a whole, and turn that into, okay, how can we always be thinking of how to advance our industry? So I guess it's tough for me to say you do X, Y, and Z and you land here.
There's definitely no firm plan by any means. But I think what I've heard you say a couple times over the last hour is that if this is what you want to do, you just do it. If you're passionate about the game, be passionate about the game. Right. And nowadays, it's about making content, whether it's YouTube, whether it's Twitch streams, it's podcasts.
I mean, still being on forums, still being out there on Reddit. Like, you're absolutely right. And, I guess I'll go away from my success story because I feel like it was a miracle of things coming together, just lucky for me. Sure. But I look at some of the people who are now here at ArenaNet who came through my alpha program back in the day. People who were playing the game, who were given an opportunity to join us and talk about the game in a more official context with the development team. And the reason they showed up here is because they had a level of passion, maturity, ability to be trusted. And I think trust is really a big part that a lot of people kind of ignore because it's like you play games and we're all here to have fun and a good time and a relaxed time. Yeah. But there's a key to it that as a player, as an employee, as a gamer in general, you are going to get a lot further if you can be trusted. Just as a friend, as someone, especially when we're talking video games, there's so much going on, so much being built, so much innovation, cutting edge, that we want people to bring in and join us who we can trust to be on that front, that we can trust with things that, they're excited to talk about with other people, but they're more excited to see how that drops when it's ready to drop. And I think that's kind of overshadowed, but the people who landed here, who went through my alpha program, showed they can be trusted and they're passionate about what they're doing. Right. So it's not just passion. Like, in fact, passion can be a problem if it gets too high. Yeah. It's like, okay, step back, you're passionate, but you're not inspiring change. You're not trusting us as developers to listen to you, and you're not trusting us, you're not spending the time presenting an argument and then trusting we'll take that on its merits or demerits or whether it fits into our vision. And like if you're too passionate and getting too excited and you think this is the end all, you're not going to fit in with the team.
Right.
So I think that's probably one of the aspects I can say that it's important to know. And I think beyond that, you're absolutely right. That if you're looking to bounce around and try new things, then be passionate about it, follow it, pursue it, talk with your companies. Like if you're lucky, you're at a company that's going to try to foster that.
Yeah. And one thing that I definitely want to kind of emphasize, because we saw it a lot in QA, of being like, I'm super passionate about this game, but knowing when to kind of reel it back in and let everything else kind of sort itself out, because your perception and your perspective was heard because the people here trusted each other and trust each other, that when you get feedback, you're expected to do something with it. So instead of operating at a high intensity the entire time, and it's like, you're not fixing this fast enough, you're not doing it fast enough, you're not listening to me hard enough.
Right.
You've said your piece.
Yeah.
Pull it back in and allow people to do their job.
And it's hard. There's things you get passionate about that you see not done, or you see done a year or two later, and you're like, I was upset about this years ago. But this is game development pace in a lot of ways. And in again, it is a collaboration between 400 people who have opinions and have thoughts and want to make it better. And so if you're the guy who's getting angry and indignant about it, you're probably the guy who's going to end up getting ignored.
Yeah. I mean, look at this. There's still no dual shields in Guild Wars 2.
I tried. I tried so hard.
The Quaggins still exist.
Yeah, but we have the Choya now, who I think are stepping into a better, like, these are like Quaggin but hardcore. Choya are awesome. Choya are awesome. Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. They don't say words, so that's the first step.
That's better.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, I'll give that to you. That's better. But I mean, I'm still waiting for the Mass Extinction player Living World update, where players are given this quest to just Quaggin have like whale blubber, and we need them to survive to take out this new threat, and so just. We killed all the younglings, and
we know they can be corrupted by dragons, so it's easy. We just have them all be in the wrong water dragon rolls around.
I'm writing the story for you guys.
I mean, this is really generous. I'm glad you're in this office, because now it's ArenaNet's property.
There you go. And you know what? I have the players behind me. They're going to just want to do this.
All of them.
I mean, you give them legendary weapons just for
saving the world against the Quaggin.
The Quaggin threat.
You know, this could tie in really well to the Azura will rule all storyline that has been promised to us via the text in the game. So I think there's potential here.
There's potential.
I'm excited. But
okay, Bobby Stein, get on that. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on here.
This was fun, Joe.
Great.
It was good to catch up.
And if you would want to do this again, I'm looking at doing a group recording another time.
That's going to be chaos.
That would be great. And so if there's any way that you want to let people know to reach out to you, where they can reach out to you, Twitter, we mentioned Leo Cleardoom.
Yeah, you can find me there.
Is there any other ways that you want to let people talk to you and stalk you outside of community work?
Twitter is probably the best for me because it buzzes right to my phone, so it's always in my pocket. You can find me on LinkedIn if you want to follow up and see where I've been and what I've done. And
worst case, people can find you on Reddit or the Guild Wars 2 forums.
Oh, I'm going to be on there because I'm still a fan.
There you go. All right, so that's episode 3 of the Summoning Hour with Evan Teicheira. And that's what we've got this week. And next week we'll have another guest. I can't remember off the top of my head who it is.
Oh, man.
But
poor other guest.
Yeah, I know. They're going to have a hard time following this one up.
Yeah, it'll be fine.
Maybe it'll be Colin Johansson.
Oh, man. That's not fair.
All right. There we go.